In a world where science moves faster than ethics, the line between salvation and destruction becomes increasingly thin. The promise of a definitive cure for diseases that have haunted humanity for centuries has fueled experiments that defy natural laws. And when technological advancement meets human ambition, a fertile ground for irreversible mistakes is born. Genetic engineering, once confined to fiction, is now a daily part of the most advanced, and perhaps the darkest, laboratories. Behind the locked doors of ultra-secret facilities, scientists manipulate biological codes with the declared goal of saving lives. But what if, in this relentless pursuit of a miracle, what is being created is exactly the opposite? What if we are already witnessing the first signs of something hiding in plain sight? Is it possible that humanity has taken its first step toward its own end by trying to conquer death? Welcome to another night, where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference so that YouTube can deliver the videos to more people, and so I can keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Imagine standing before a discovery that promises to cure incurable diseases, and at the same time, being aware that this very discovery could, with a minimal error, trigger the end of humanity. That's exactly where science found itself in 1999, when Jesse Gelsinger, a healthy young man, volunteered for a groundbreaking gene therapy study. The idea was revolutionary: use a modified virus to correct his faulty DNA. But just days after the experiment, Jesse was dead. The promise of a cure had revealed its darkest side. Jesse's case was not an isolated accident. He became the symbol of a line that had been crossed. Since then, genetic engineering has developed at an astonishing speed. Scientists began programming viruses to perform specific tasks inside the human body: cure cancer, fight rare diseases, regenerate tissues. But this technology, as precise as it is unstable, carries a silent dilemma. What if, instead of saving, it starts transforming? This transformation wouldn't be immediate or scandalous. It would begin discreetly, perhaps in an isolated lab, far from the public eye. In 2001, a group of Australian researchers tried to create a vaccine to control agricultural pests. They modified the mousepox virus. The result was terrifying: a completely lethal strain, capable of killing even vaccinated animals. The study was shut down, but the data remains public. What if this kind of research is being replicated today, far from oversight, with even more dangerous agents? The logic behind these experiments is simple. To treat the human body, you need to invade its cells. Viruses are perfect for this. But when you alter them, every line of genetic code inserted is a gamble. They adapt, replicate, interact with living environments. No one can guarantee the behavior of a virus over time, much less once it leaves the lab. This raises an unavoidable question: who is really in control? Many research centers operate under total secrecy, and although protocols exist, there are pressures for results, funding at stake, and above all, a silent pride in being the first to achieve the definitive cure. But haste does not forgive unpredictability. What happens when a viral vector undergoes an undetectable mutation in a patient's body? What happens if that mutation becomes transmissible? The science fiction scenario starts to feel all too familiar. Movies like I Am Legend didn't create fear out of nowhere. In that story's universe, a treatment for cancer causes a global mutation, turning humans into violent, light-sensitive creatures. It sounds absurd, until you remember that in real life, we are right now modifying viruses with genetic engineering and testing them on humans. The line between fiction and possibility is thinner than we'd like to admit. And the most unsettling part: not all research is made public. Some are protected by military secrecy or corporate agreements. There are treatments being tested in conflict zones, isolated regions, communities that will never know they're part of something bigger. Science, when allied with power and secrecy, ceases to be neutral. It becomes a weapon, or worse, a disguised social experiment. And this is where the question changes tone. It's no longer could this go wrong, but rather when will it? How many therapies are being applied right now, at this very moment, without their long-term effects being understood? How many modified vectors are circulating through human bodies, carrying instructions no scientist can fully predict? What makes it even more disturbing is the silence. The absence of headlines. The idea that, Even if something has already gotten out of control, no one would dare to speak. Jesse's story was one of the few to come to light, and only because it ended in tragedy. How many similar stories have been buried under confidentiality clauses? So, looking at this scenario, a question begins to take shape. In trying to defeat death, has humanity ended up creating the seed of its own end? On a secluded road in Maryland, United States, there is a heavily guarded complex surrounded by forests and high walls. Its name is Fort Detrick. Officially, it is a biomedical research center, but few know that it also served for decades as the heart of the U.S. biological warfare programs. Many believe these activities ended with international agreements. But if they really ended, why are there still inaccessible underground wings, laboratories classified as BSL, for the most dangerous in the world? These laboratories handle the deadliest pathogens ever identified, viruses for which there is no vaccine, no cure, and no effective containment protocol in the event of a leak. And it's not just in the US. In the city of Wuhan, China, there stands a similar center, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was at the center of speculation during the 2020 pandemic. There are also similar structures in countries like Russia and Canada. They all have one thing in common: absolute silence about what is actually researched within their walls. What these facilities truly study is a carefully guarded mystery. But there are leaks, not just of viruses, but of information. In 1979, an accident in Sverdlovsk, then part of the Soviet Union, released anthrax spores into the air, killing dozens of civilians. Officially, the explanation was a natural outbreak. Years later, documents revealed that the agent had escaped from a military lab. The very structure designed to protect the world was, ironically, experimenting with its destruction. And this is where the unease sets in. If there were failures in the past, what prevents them from happening now, in places where the press is not allowed, where protocols are defined by strategic interests, not scientific ones? These centers do not answer to the global scientific community. Their discoveries are not shared. They are used as pieces in a political chess game, where the power to create and hide is more valuable than the power to cure. What really happens inside these structures remains behind doors the world pretends not to see. The employees themselves sign confidentiality agreements with clauses that prohibit them from speaking, even decades later. Some who decided to break the silence were discredited, labeled as paranoid. But in every silenced testimony, there's a pattern. Research with experimental viruses, resistance tests in non-human models, propagation simulations. What is the ultimate goal of these simulations? There's a detail often overlooked: BSL, for laboratories, don't exist solely for containment. They're also used for development. This means that, beyond studying existing viruses, some centers work on creating entirely new strains, artificial organisms, shaped to test pandemic scenarios or new forms of biological defense. But when you start creating something from scratch, are you still studying or manufacturing? This kind of technology comes dangerously close to the concept of a biological weapon. And even if the initial goal is noble, like developing more effective vaccines, the line between prevention and militarization is extremely thin, especially when governments and major corporations compete for control of the knowledge. What would happen if one of these creations escaped? And more importantly, how would we even know if it already has? During the global pandemic, many eyes turned to the Wuhan Institute, raising theories about a possible leak. Authorities denied it. But the mere fact that this possibility was technically viable says a lot about the risks involved. In a world where air traffic connects countries in hours, a lethal pathogen doesn't need much time to spread. Just minutes. One mistake. One distraction. And while the world is soothed by official statements, these laboratories keep operating, researching, modifying, creating, with no transparency whatsoever. What separates safety from catastrophe is not walls or protocols. It is the hope that everyone involved knows exactly what they are doing and never loses control. But if they already have, who would have the courage to admit it? It's not necessary to transform the body to create a monster. Sometimes all that changes is the brain. This is the point where biological terror stops being merely a matter of infection and becomes a silent game of manipulation. Science already knows that certain biological agents can alter the behavior of their hosts. But what if these changes are induced intentionally? The rabies virus is the most classic example. Upon infecting a mammal, it migrates directly to the nervous system, altering the centers of aggression and survival instinct. Animals that were once docile become hostile. Humans lose control. The disease is known, studied, treatable. But it reveals a much deeper principle. Microorganisms can invade the mind and shape it. Another fascinating and, at the same time, disturbing example is the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. In rats, it erases the natural fear they have of cats, making them easy prey. In humans, studies suggest it can interfere with dopamine levels and may be associated with behavioral changes, such as impulsivity or increased risk of psychiatric disorders. If something so small can do this, what else might be silently acting inside us? There are also fungi from the Cordyceps genus, which invade insects and literally take control of their bodies. The host walks to a location ideal for the fungus to spread, and only then dies. The scenario is so absurd it seems fictional. And yet, it's real. The animal's behavior is no longer its own. It becomes an extension of the parasite's programming. Now think of this adapted to humans. Today, scientists are exploring ways to modulate brain functions through biological stimuli. Neuroscience has advanced to the point of identifying which brain regions control fear, obedience, aggression. And in specific laboratories, there is research combining viral vectors with neurologically active molecules. The question is no longer if it's possible, but for what purpose? In 2016, a DARPA study revealed investment in the Safe Genes project. The official goal was to create mechanisms to undo unwanted genetic modifications, but the documents also spoke of real-time gene expression control. This means, in theory, turning biological behaviors on or off. One switch turns on, another turns off. The human being as a reprogrammable operating system. In movies like Wreck or The Andromeda Strain, human creatures lose reason after contact with experimental pathogens. On screen, this translates into screaming, white eyes violence. In real life, it may be more subtle. Bursts of aggression, increased neurological disorders, disproportionate emotional reactions. Are we talking about evidence? No, but we are talking about signs. Records of inexplicable outbreaks, people entering altered states of consciousness without using drugs, extreme social behaviors. All of this has been documented by independent researchers, but rarely enters major studies. The data is isolated, scattered, disconnected. But what if, together, they begin to form a pattern? The possibility of shaping human minds through biological tools is no longer a theory. It's a research field. And like any promising field, it attracts interest, military, corporate, political. Behavior control has always been a silent obsession among those who hold power. But now that control can come from inside the body, not outside. How many of our decisions are truly our own, and how many have already been influenced by something invisible, programmed, inoculated years ago, in the name of a promise of healing? Every time you hear about DARPA, it's about some revolutionary innovation. The internet, GPS, autonomous drones. But what rarely gets mentioned is that while the world debates visible technologies, DARPA operates on a completely different level. One where viruses are not just organisms to be fought, but moldable, reprogrammable, and usable tools. When you understand what lies behind the agency's laboratories, you begin to realize that some questions were asked too early, and others too late. In one of its most discreet projects, titled Safe Genes, the stated goal was to protect populations from genetic threats. But the documents that slipped out of secrecy suggest something deeper: the creation of mechanisms capable of reversing or activating genes on demand through viral vectors. It's not just about treating diseases. It's about controlling, in real time, what a body does or doesn't do. And of course, this isn't being tested in school labs. Now imagine this applied outside controlled environments. A virus released into the wild, designed to remain dormant until it receives an external stimulus, a radio frequency, a substance in the water, a change in temperature. It sounds like a movie script, but it's a concept that has already been successfully tested in cell cultures and animal models. We're talking about biological agents that can be activated as if they had a switch. DARPA itself has a history that reinforces this line of action. Among its past projects are experiments with neural interfaces, implantable sensors, and brain stimulation. Officially, all of this aims to treat trauma in soldiers. but any technology that allows for precise modulation of pain, obedience, fear, or aggression can also be used for other purposes. Who decides the final application? And just when we think it can't go further, the Insect Allies project emerges. The proposal: to use insects as vectors to deliver beneficial viruses to crops, protecting agriculture. But what if the viral payload is something else? What if the target isn't the plants? Scientists around the world raised this concern, and the silence in response was deafening. A pattern begins to emerge, and it's not comforting. These experiments share one common point: the power to alter living organisms through external commands. It's biology operating as if it were software, a body responding to genetic codes like a computer responds to lines of command. And we're no longer talking about the future. This is already happening. The only questions are where and to whom. DARPA's structure allows exactly this kind of advancement. By contracting civilian laboratories with segmented agreements, often even the scientists themselves don't have access to the full scope of what they're developing. Fragmenting knowledge is the perfect way to maintain secrecy. You create something without anyone fully understanding what's being created. And here we reach the most delicate point. Gene editing with CRISPR is already accessible in common labs. Now imagine this in the hands of an organization with an almost unlimited budget, legal protection, and objectives that mix defense, surveillance, and biological domination. What's being done away from the cameras may not be just defense. It may be programming. While governments and organizations debate ethical boundaries, technology advances in silence. Without real international regulation, without effective oversight, what DARPA is developing now may only be understood decades from now, when its effects are already among us, diluted into daily life, without anyone noticing. And what if some of these creations are already in the field? Not to cause immediate panic, but to wait for the right moment? Some names carry weight, others carry warnings. Lazarus is one of those. Associated with the idea of resurrection, of reversing death, it has been used by laboratories, secret projects, and experiments that should never have left the drawing board. When a scientific initiative adopts that name, what is it really trying to bring back? Rumors about Project Lazarus always surface the same way, discreetly in fragments, with no official sources. But the recurring elements are too disturbing to ignore. The name appears in leaked documents, in research contracts from major pharmaceutical companies, and even in health agency protocols. The reports vary, but the objective always seems the same: to experiment with definitive genetic cures, applied directly to humans, often in remote populations, without access to international oversight. And we're not talking about fiction. In countries with poor health regulation, there are unconfirmed reports of neurological outbreaks, behavioral changes, and sudden deaths following medical campaigns promoted by private foundations. The information is always suppressed, the data revised, and the teams replaced. No official explanation, no in-depth investigation, but a silent pattern repeats itself. What is most intriguing is the profile of the targets. They are always isolated locations with precarious infrastructure, yet with the presence of major biotech or philanthropic corporations. Coincidence? Maybe. But then why do these same regions vanish from international surveillance maps for months after the incidents? Why are local journalists intimidated or simply disappear after trying to expose these events? The name Lazarus has also been associated with clinical trials not found in official databases. In partial records from European laboratories, there are mentions of cellular regeneration protocols capable of restoring organ function, even after severe nerve tissue damage. It sounds promising, until the side effects are analyzed: brain hyperactivity, episodes of aggression, loss of identity. It's not regeneration, it's transformation. And when these reports are cross-referenced with military information, the picture becomes even darker. Some medical bases linked to NATO and the UN have been cited as testing grounds for experimental therapies, all under the justification of humanitarian aid. But behind the lab coats, there are bioengineering protocols that do not belong to traditional medicine. The kind of material that is not published, only executed. In the film industry, movies like The Cured explore this very idea: the attempt to cure an aggressive virus, but which transforms the infected into something different. And when the cure comes, there's no way to know if the one who returns is the same person as before. The parallel with Project Lazarus is inevitable. Science tries to reverse the irreversible, but not everything that dies should return. Among the few more structured pieces of information about the project, one stands out: the presence of behavioral tracking and monitoring systems attached to the test subjects. Implanted devices, continuous data collection, genetic alterations made on demand. We're talking about human beings turned into biological test platforms, without notice, without consent, all under the name of a miracle. But perhaps the most disturbing thing is the silence. When a name like Lazarus appears in more than one country, in more than one context, with equally hidden results, it's no longer a coincidence. If this project exists, or once existed, it represents more than a genetic experiment. It represents the arrogance of those who believe they can conquer death, without considering what might come in place of life. And what if Project Lazarus isn't about resurrection, but about replacement? Most end-of-the-world stories begin with an explosion, a sudden collapse, a chain reaction warning. But what if destruction doesn't come with noise, but with silence? What if we're not on the brink of collapse, but already inside it, living through the first phase of something no one noticed starting? The movie World War Z begins with the world seemingly normal. Until, without warning, chaos sets in. The difference between fiction and reality is that, out here, there's no dramatic soundtrack announcing the danger. There are only statistics, data that doesn't make sense, disconnected reports, small signs that up close seem isolated, but from afar form a pattern. In recent years, outbreaks of unexplained violent behavior have spread across different regions of the world. Apparently healthy people, with no history of disorders, enter states of sudden rage, as if something had been activated inside them. Psychiatrists say it's stress. Virologists prefer not to comment. But when the number of cases rises and the profiles don't match any known diagnosis, doubt begins to creep in. Are we dealing with something new? Add to that the reports of social zombies, people wandering the streets, blank stares, mechanical movements, no emotional response. They're not infected in the traditional sense. They're apathetic, disconnected, as if part of their consciousness had been shut down. Drugs, mental disorders, digital influence. Every explanation tries to fill the gap, but none truly fits. Because maybe the question is wrong. Maybe it's not what caused this, but rather, who? And the symptoms don't stop there. In some places, neurological outbreaks have been recorded with symptoms so atypical they don't even fit into known medical classifications. Unexplained tremors, auditory alterations, repetitive behavior, selective aggression. Patients often disappear from records after hospitalization. No bulletins, no confirmation, just the trail of what was hidden. There's also a more subtle, and perhaps more terrifying, shift: the erosion of collective behavior. Society seems to be operating under a constant state of tension, as if there's an invisible frequency of irritation in the air. Trivial arguments escalate into violence. Empathy disappears, and the normalization of the absurd becomes routine. What is happening to people? Independent scientists have already proposed the hypothesis that large-scale behavioral changes could be the result of continuous environmental exposure to low-impact biological vectors. Something like a slow-acting virus that doesn't cause fever or cough, but gradually alters brain function. What if that phase has already begun? It doesn't take everyone getting sick at once. All it takes is a small percentage of the population to be affected, and the social fabric begins to tear. Fear spreads faster than any pathogen. And it's in this scenario that control sets in, not with tanks or sirens, but with precautions, campaigns, emergency procedures. All in the name of containment. And what if the true phase one isn't an obvious viral outbreak, but a testing stage? A biological simulation in an open field, with humans as variables? The kind of operation that can only be detected after it's already happened? Maybe the apocalypse won't start tomorrow. Maybe it began 3 years ago, and the world, distracted by wars and algorithms, still hasn't noticed. Project Lazarus is not just a theory about genetic manipulation or viruses out of control. It represents the portrait of an era in which humanity began to toy with biological codes as if writing lines of code, believing it could correct, erase, or restart its own existence without consequence. In each chapter, we've seen more than parallels with fiction. We've seen real signs, forgotten connections, and patterns that, when combined, suggest something is already in motion, even if no one has the courage to name it. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the full puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it, because more voices mean more discoveries.